yesterday was the 11th of November, which was obviously Remembrance Armistice Day. On Sunday it was Remembrance Sunday, so this for me is quite a poignant foresight. And I want to introduce you to my uncle. This is Flight Sgt James Linehan. We knew he'd been killed in the war, but that's all we knew. And my father, when I was young, he took me to a place called Runnymede. I don't know if anybody knows Runnymede. It's in Surrey, and it's a place that it's on a hill, and it's a huge RAF memorial place. And it was built to commemorate the 20,000 that didn't have a grave. Every year there's a service there about May time, and now I start going. At the time I didn't know anything. My grandmother was obviously devastated. She kept waiting for him to come back, and he didn't. My last uncle, his brother, Uncle Pat, was still alive, so I thought, I'll go try and find Jim before Pat goes. There was also my Auntie Joyce. She used to go out with Jim during the war. She was still alive. She had dementia. I think I've got to try and find what's happened to Jim before these two go. In my research, I discovered that it wasn't just my Uncle Jim that had died. It was 5 other men as well. So 6 young men. They'd all been killed, but we didn't know where. And that made me more, more determined to find them. I felt it was my duty to find what happened to these guys. I wanted to track down the families. 2 of the crew came from the Antipodes. One was Australian, he was in the New Zealand Air Force. And the other one, the observer, he was a Kiwi, so they were both in the New Zealand Air Force together. So I did a quick search and I found the pilot's father, and he died the year after the pilot had been killed. And I sent out a message to the Sydney Morning Herald asking them whether they could put a notice in their kind of Find a Family section. They said we can, but it'll take several months. Then 6 months later I got an email from a nephew of the pilot. I'm going cold now, sorry. And that was obviously in a very emotional time because he had known nothing. I was able to tell him what I'd found so far, and he was able to tell me a bit about how the pilot, who was called Noel, but liked to be called Bill, so how Bill, I don't know why, they were able to tell me a bit about what Bill was like. In my search, while I was working to find out what happened to the crew, I looked on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and I don't know if anybody's ever done that. It lists all the you might have done that, Angela, or your father might have done. It lists all the casualties, but it also lists things like parental details and where people came from, that sort of thing. So I found all the details of my crew, except for the rear gunner. The rear gunner, there was nothing. No family details, nothing at all. I thought, he's going to be a pig to find, and he was. The next person I started to look for was Flight Sergeant Larry Vogan, or George Hillary Vogan, he was called. And he was the other New Zealander, and he was the observer on the plane. And eventually, I managed to make contact with the family, and they sent me this photograph. And this is the only photograph I've been able to find, which I'll pass around, of the crew together. So then I started to look for the British crew. The second wireless operator was a chap called Graham Lakeman. I don't know whether anybody's into Folk and has heard of Seth Lakeman. Anybody? No? Yes, Seth Lakeman. Graham Lakeman was Seth Lakeman's uncle. So got a bit of fame on my uncle's crew. And whilst I was going through my father's paperwork after my father died, I found this letter. And it was from Graham's father to my grandfather, Jim's father, going, have you found any information about the plane? And it was listed, it was addressed up in Greenock. I'm thinking, why is he from up in Greenock? Because he come from Plymouth. But the father, Lakeman Senior, was a Navy man, so he was up in Scotland. And I also found that there was another relative, Ken Lakeman, who was a D-Day veteran. So, having discovered that he was living up in Greenock at that time, I contacted one of the Greenock newspapers, and the Greenock Times put an article in. I didn't get that initial comeback from it, but a little while later I got a call from a chap called Terry Lakeman, and he was a family archivist who was looking at his family history, but not that line of the family, so he got quite interested too. And he said there's excuse me, a lady who lived locally to him near Plymouth and Exeter called Rita Riddler, and she was the last surviving member of Graham's family from the war period. And I drove down to Devon to meet them both. And the three of us, we had a really, obviously, emotional time. I showed her the letter, she gave me a photograph of Graham, and she actually remembered him as a young man, and he said he was into forestry, and he was a really nice sort of chap. So that was obviously very emotional. Most of the experts believe that this plane crashed on the North Holland coast at Leland. I don't know whether anybody, I'm going to do it this way round. So this is, England's over here, Dutch coast here, North Germany is sort of here-ish. They believe this plane crashed here. And as part of that, at this particular time when I was searching, I was doing work for the Stichting Missing Airmen's Memorial Foundation in Leeuwarden. And they're a Dutch foundation, and they research what's happened to crash sites, and then they erect memorials and that sort of thing. The Dutch are very grateful for what we did for them, both in Operation Manor, which was after the war, and in January just freeing them from the Nazis. So I was invited over to go to one of these memorials. We were taken round, we were treated to dinner. If you mention that you're from an RAF family, it's like your royalty. The door's open for you, they talk to you, they take you anywhere. From this particular group, they paid for 2 of the personnel files. They paid for the files of Sgt Norman Naylor and Roland Richards. Ronald Richards. I'm going to call him 2 names, Ronald or Roland, I'll tell you why later. So from that, I was able to find out more information. I found out that Norman Naylor came from Dunfermline, and I was thinking, why Dunfermline? Anyway, so I did some research, but I couldn't find him up in Dunfermline. And after, as I said, the internet, you do a search, and then you didn't find anything, but then 3 months later you can do the same search or similar, and you'll find things. So eventually I found him on the Chipping Norton Royal British Legion website, and I was able to contact the curator of the Chipping Norton Museum, and she said, yeah, I remember the family. Hang on a minute, and she came back about an hour later. I said, yes, I remember the family, they were living here, they've now gone to the States. And I wasn't able to contact the family directly in the States because the lady had just moved and she was all busy and that sort of thing. But at least I had managed to contact the family indirectly, and I had a photograph of him. So that was another one that my crew found. Then we come to my mystery man, Ronald Jeffrey Richards. He's the rear gunner, and he was the one that had no details at all on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Whatever I searched, I could find nothing to tie in with him. No birth records, no death records, no marriage records, no nothing. And I was thinking, I was beginning to think maybe he was adopted. I phoned Bernardo's, they wouldn't deal with me because I wasn't family. I phoned Wakefield Hospital because they used to have the old poorhouse, poorhouse records, so they wouldn't deal with me either. And I was on these different genealogical websites on the internet, and I got this distant relative of the Richards family saying to me, the whole family changed their names in the 1930s. They were originally Cheetham, and then they changed to Richards. Now Cheetham is an area in Manchester, and it's a Jewish area, so it makes me think possibly there was a Jewish connection in the family, and they were hiding it. So they could see what was happening in Germany, so they were hiding their Jewishness. That's my belief. I can't say whether that's true or not. Within that family, they had some famous photographers. They were court photographers, so they were quite a big, well-known family. I was on Rouge Chat, and there was a lady who was saying, I'm looking for information on an airman who was lost on the 8th of April 1942. His name is Roland Richards. So I emailed her going, no, you've got the name wrong. And the toing and froing, and eventually we worked out it was the chap that I was looking for, and it turned out that he had lied about his name and his date of birth by 1 letter and 1 year. So all that, just check, he in the RAF records he was Ronald, and in his own records he was Roland. And I think it was 22 and 23, 1922, 1923 was the years. So he was underage when he signed up. He was 19, and he'd done that so that he could join up. And he was the youngest person on the plane. My uncle was 20, Roland was 19. The others were 22, 23, 20. Pilot Bill was 28. So I had finally found my mystery man. This lady, she had the address for Roland's nephew. And I wrote him a letter, gave him all the military records that I'd found, and then I heard nothing for ages. And then all of a sudden I got this phone call from this man. The letter had got lost and gone the rounds of Wakefield, and he was overjoyed that I had found this information for him. And he was so pleased. He was, because they had been trying to trace him for 70 years. The RAF said that he didn't exist, even though they had a photograph of him in RAF uniform. And because of this name difference, that's why there was this confusion from the RAF. So I'm very proud that I was able to reunite the family with their relative, and they've contacted the RAF to change all the records. Whilst I was doing this crew research, I was also researching my uncle's career. And there's a family legend that he was the youngest ever pilot officer. This turned out to be wrong. It was a kind of these family urban legends that go, change as they go on. And he was the youngest pilot in his company that he worked for. 1940, just aged 18, he volunteered and enlisted in the volunteer reserve. Now, a lot of them were headhunted. We believe he might have been headhunted because they were good at maths and sports, that sort of thing, and they needed that for the navigational, as Lady's husband was saying last night, because they had to do all this dead reckoning and spatial calculations whilst they're flying. They wanted people that were exceptionally good at maths. Jim was excellent at maths. He was captain of the sports team. He was good at football, and he was a very good sports person. But he was also into RE, which you'll be pleased to know. And he was also quite artistic, from what I've discovered. Now, normally I have a photograph of him wearing a white flash across his cap. That means he was a pilot under training. So if you ever see anybody, any photograph that's got a white flash across the pilot's or the aircrew's hat, that means they're in training. In 1940, he was at No. 8 Service Flying School in Montrose, and he trained on a range of planes, and he gained his wings in May 1941. He started off in fighter command in 52 OTU, which is in Debden. And not a lot of people realise that a lot of these casualties that happened during World War II were not just in combat missions, they were on training flights, they were in sorties, just general kind of that sort of thing. So when we do remembrance, we need to remember the people that were lost on the ground, like aircrew, and also people who were lost in training, because they all played their part. I discovered that Jim crashed a hurricane. Oops. Not every day you can say that. We also discovered that he was absent without leave. They had what was called then lacking moral fibre. We would now call it post-traumatic stress disorder. And it was very, very stressful. They were flying night after night into enemy territory. There were lots of lights, lots of tracer bullets, all this sort of thing. And some people found that too stressful, and I believe my uncle had that. He was severely reprimanded, and now I was talking to a lady's husband last night, and I thought he'd been punished and transferred to Bomber Command. But this, Dennis was saying that it may be that his aptitude wasn't for fighter planes, it was more for having it in a crew. So he was transferred to Bomber Command, which is night fighting, and he trained on various planes, and he was put on a Wellington. The photos that I got from the pilot's family, there's the pilot and Jim are in the pilot class together. So we believe that they at least knew each other in passing, if not were friends. And the two of them joined 57 Squadron in Feltwell in 1941, November 41, so around now. In December 41, he was promoted to sergeant, and in February 42, he was promoted to flight sergeant. Because they were losing crews so fast, people went up the ranks really quickly. Now, the way they crewed up, it was very egalitarian. It wasn't done by the RAF themselves. All the guys went into a hangar, doors were shut, and they were told, get on with it. So they crewed themselves up. So you could be, say, Jim and Bill together, two pilots. We need a rear gunner now. Oh, you a rear gunner? Okay, come on, like, a bit like top trump, someone said. So you kind of, made it crew like that. So, and it was a good way of breaking down the class barriers, because this was one of the first times that the classes mixed together on a fairly even basis. Yes, there was some class, but it meant they would meet people from different levels of society more easily than they would have done in normal society before the war. The attrition rate for Bomber Command was 50%. And life expectancy was just 3 weeks. I learned that Jim flew with 2 crews, and I thought, great, I'll contact the crews and I can talk to them about my uncle. Because obviously I don't know him, I only know him from what I've discovered. I thought I'd find out what he was like, whether he was a nice man. Obviously I think he's a nice man. But they were killed, all of them, the week before he died. This is how fast these guys were being killed. A week later, on the 8th of April 1942, Jim and the crew of Wellington X-3757, pilot Noel Morse, Royal New Zealand Air Force, Flight Sergeant Larry Vogan, also Royal New Zealand Air Force, Sgt Graham Lakeman, Plymouth, Sergeant Norman Naylor, Dunfermline, Sergeant Roland Richards, Wakefield, took off on a raid to Hamburg at 22:05. They were never heard from again. The officer commanding, there's a record of him putting out saying, call them on the blow, call them on the blow, and there was no answer. His total service was 1 year, 275 days, or just 12 combat missions. Your consensus is they crashed in the North Sea, north of Holland. I disagree. I paid a German researcher in the Bundesarchive to go through all the files, and I've come to the conclusion that this is incorrect. And I hope to prove this one day. It's one of my goals. And I've contacted several rep companies, and I've sent all my files to one in the Wilhelmshaven area. They recently, last year or the year before, they recovered a Wellington in the Isselmeer in Holland. So they've got all that equipment. They can drain, they put that coffer down, they drain all the water out. And I'm hoping that we're able to do that for my uncle. They found something, but it needs to be dived in. It's quite a difficult dive. So I'm praying. Whilst I was involved in this, I became involved in a group called the Support the Bomber Command Memorial Facebook group, and we did a lot of fundraising. I had a book of charity photographs which I used to raise money for the upkeep of the memorial, because at one point they weren't sure how they were going to upkeep it. And then I've got friends a friend who's walked from the Bomber Command Memorial in London all the way to the IBCC just up the road here, and she did that to raise money and funds as well. In 2012, the Bomber Command Memorial in Green Park was unveiled in the presence of Her Majesty the Queen. Now, I was able to get tickets for my family, my brother who was named after my uncle, myself, my then partner, my 2 cousins who were the daughters of Joyce, my auntie Joyce, who went out with Jim during the war. Okay, I'm nearly done. I've got a range of photographic cards that I have, and I've written a feature script. I've got a short film that I made, and I've also written a feature script about this as a way of redressing the balance. During the war, 120,000 personnel served with Bomber Command. 55,000 of them, 573, never came home. 20,000 have no known grave. My dream, to stand by the crash site of Wellington X-3757, or as close as I can get if it's mud flats, and on behalf of all 6 families, lay a wreath and a plaque filling the void lost in those 6 families, but also representing all those who have no known grave. But ardua ad astra, they shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Thank you.
Very good.